My ex-boyfriend Tyson proposed to me on my birthday mere hours after he had slept with my sister. The most devastating part was that everyone knew about the betrayal. My mom, my friends, even distant relatives. Yet no one told me until 6 months into wedding planning, when a bridesmaid drunkenly revealed the truth. I ended the engagement immediately and gave him 1 week to remove his belongings from my apartment. Tyson cycled through apologies, tears, and promises, insisting the situation wasn't what it seemed. When that failed, his anger surfaced. "Fine, let's break up," he said, "but I want the ring back." I was stunned by his audacity. "Wait, you cheat on me with my sister and now you want my dead mother's ring, the one you got for free from my dad?" He simply nodded. "Yeah, that's the ring." "Get out," I warned before I call the cops. He stepped outside with his box, then paused. "So, the ring?" I slammed the door in his face and locked it. Why was he so fixated on that ring? That was 3 months ago. Since then, Tyson hadn't stopped demanding its return. He bombarded me with daily texts about how unfair I was being, claiming his new girlfriend, my sister, deserved to wear my mother's ring too. "She would have wanted your sister to be happy," he argued. I blocked his number, but that only escalated his behavior. He started appearing at my workplace during lunch, pleading with my colleagues to convince me to do the right thing. When I refused, he called me bitter and vindictive for clinging to a memento. The irony was crushing. All I wanted was to move on from one of the most painful experiences of my life, but he was relentless. Everything centered on that ring. Why? The answer began to unfold when my friend Jane invited me on a girls' trip for the weekend. 3 days away from all this Tyson madness, she persuaded me. Before leaving, I asked my dad to stay at my apartment and look after my orange cat. "Sure thing, sweetie," he gently replied. I packed my bags, posted photos online, and finally felt like I was moving forward. For the next few days, I relaxed on the beach, made new friends, and went hiking. For the first time in months, I was genuinely happy, not thinking about Tyson or the ring. I was healing. But I didn't know that Tyson, obsessively watching my Instagram from a fake account, saw his opportunity. He knew my apartment would be empty. That Sunday at 2 a.m., my phone rang. It was the police. I cut my trip short and immediately began the 4-hour drive back home, my heart racing the entire way. When I arrived, an officer waved me over and refused to let me enter my apartment. "It's real bad in there," he explained, shaking his head. 12 years in law enforcement and you'd think I'd seen it all." As my anxiety spiked, he relayed the events of the night. Tyson had arrived at my apartment at 11 p.m., parking 2 blocks away to avoid recognition. He crept onto the porch, peering into each window before circling the entire house. Returning to the front door, he pulled out a lockpick kit he'd bought online. It took him nearly 20 determined minutes, but he finally got the door open and headed straight for my bedroom, knowing my jewelry box was in the top dresser drawer. I was so desperately digging through it that he didn't hear the footsteps approaching down the hall. My dad, who was watching my cat, had heard the lock being picked and moved silently into position. As Tyson rifled through my things, my dad's marine instincts took over. He stepped into the bedroom doorway and said in a deathly calm voice, "Don't make any sudden movements if you want to live. Now turn around slowly and put your hands where I can see them." Tyson, in a moment of sheer stupidity, grabbed the nearest heavy object and hurled it at my dad before trying to rush past him. "That was his first mistake," the officer said, frowning. "The rest you'll have to see for yourself." He led me past the yellow tape to witness the gruesome aftermath. It was a miracle Tyson had survived. The doctors confirmed he would live, but his injuries were severe. However, the nightmare wasn't over. Detectives told me they had found something in the trunk of Tyson's car that I needed to see. When I asked what it was, the detective could only apologize repeatedly, refusing to discuss it over the phone. At the station, the reality finally shattered my understanding. The detective showed me a photo on his tablet, an insurance policy with my name forged at the bottom, claiming Tyson owned my mother's ring as a gift from my dad. Next to it was a business card for Eric's Pawn and Jewelry, with a date scribbled on the back in Tyson's handwriting, 2 days after my weekend away. He swiped to another photo, a burner phone screen filled with increasingly threatening texts from an unknown number, demanding Tyson pay up or provide valuable collateral for a loan. The last message, sent 3 days prior, gave him 1 week before. Things got ugly. My stomach turned as I stared at the evidence. All this time, Tyson wasn't begging for the ring out of love for my sister or a desire to hurt me. He was desperate for money. Detective Lombard stepped closer, explaining they had found more documents under the spare tire, including a forged gift affidavit claiming my dad had legally transferred the ring to Tyson. The notary stamp was fake. Tyson had been constructing an elaborate backup plan. If I refused to hand over the ring, he would file a fraudulent insurance claim accusing me of stealing his property. I was reeling. The months of harassment suddenly made horrific sense. He never intended to give the ring to my sister. He was going to pawn it to cover his gambling debts. Detective Lombard pointed out dates and amounts, mentioning betting apps on his phone and records showing he'd lost over $20,000 in recent months. The loan shark texts perfectly aligned with his losses, painting a portrait of a desperate man in a downward spiral. When I asked if my sister knew, the detective said they would question her next, but all evidence pointed to Tyson acting alone. This should have been a relief, but it only made me feel worse, knowing my sister had chosen to be with someone capable of such profound deception without understanding who he truly was. Detective advised me to go somewhere safe for the night. I called my dad, and he told me to come straight to his house. He was already there waiting for me. The drive felt surreal, my hands shaking on the steering wheel as I replayed every conversation where Tyson had begged for the ring. Every word had been a manipulation, every tear an act. It was all a calculated performance leading to the moment he could steal the ring when my guard was down. Pulled into my dad's driveway and found him sitting on the porch steps, still in the same clothes, looking utterly exhausted. He stood and pulled me into a tight, wordless hug. We went inside, and he made coffee despite the late hour, both of us too wired to sleep. I sat at his kitchen table and recounted the entire ordeal of the past 3 months. Every text, every confrontation, every time Tyson had made me feel guilty for keeping my own mother's ring. Dad listened, his jaw tightening with each new detail. When I finished, he said he felt like an idiot for ever giving Tyson the ring, for trusting such a skilled liar. I told him it wasn't his fault that Tyson had fooled us both, but I could see the weight of guilt heavy on his shoulders. We stayed up until sunrise, neither of us able to stop thinking about what might have happened if he hadn't been there. At exactly 8:00 the next morning, Detective Lombard called. Tyson had made it through surgery and was stable, suffering from multiple broken bones and internal injuries that would require a long, painful recovery. A weird mix of relief and anger washed over me. Relief that my dad wouldn't face charges, and anger that Tyson would eventually walk away from this. Detective Lombard assured me the district attorney was intent on prosecuting the case to the fullest extent. She asked me to come to the station to give a formal statement. I agreed, then called my boss and vaguely explained I had a family emergency, not yet ready to share the horrifying details. At the police station, I walked Detective Lombard through my entire relationship with Tyson, from our meeting 2 years ago to the drunken revelation of his betrayal and the subsequent 3 months of harassment. She took detailed notes, asking specific questions about dates and threats. He then showed me security footage I never knew existed. In grainy black and white, I watched Tyson's car circle my block multiple times before parking 2 streets away. I saw him methodically check windows, walk the perimeter of the building, and finally spend 19 determined minutes picking my lock. This wasn't a crime of passion. It was a calculated, premeditated invasion. Evidence Tech brought in photos of the lockpick set, still in its Amazon packaging with a receipt dated 3 weeks prior. This proves premeditation beyond any doubt, the detective stated. More photos of his car's interior revealed the forged insurance documents and the pawn shop appointment. Each piece of evidence painted the same chilling picture. The man I had almost married had spent weeks meticulously planning to commit multiple felonies against me. The interview room door opened, and a woman in a dark suit introduced herself as Alina Stowe, the assistant district attorney handling the case. She explained that given the overwhelming evidence of premeditation, forgery, and insurance fraud, Tyson was facing serious felony charges that could carry significant prison time. Her voice was professional yet warm, and she made it clear the state would pursue this aggressively, regardless of any pressure I might feel from family. When I mentioned my sister's dozens of missed calls, Alina nodded, saying it was wise not to speak to her yet. This assurance was a relief. The burden was no longer solely on my shoulders. Alina provided paperwork and said the process would take months, but they were confident. Before I left, Detective Lombard slid my apartment keys across the table. I pushed them back, stating I could never return. The thought of being in that bedroom, where Tyson had violated my space, made my skin crawl. She understood and mentioned victim services could help with relocation costs. Dad immediately offered to pack my essentials with a police escort. As I made a list, my hands shook. When I got to the jewelry box, I asked that someone else handle it. I didn't want him touching my mom's ring after what had happened. He understood, and the detective arranged for an officer to retrieve it. While Dad went to my apartment, I waited in the detective's office. She suggested I get a restraining order for when Tyson was released. The thought of him being free again tightened my chest. Alina returned with the paperwork, and we filed a temporary order right then, prohibiting any contact, direct or indirect. I signed the forms, and Alina promised to fast-track them. Dad returned hours later with boxes and my terrified cat. At his house, she hid under the bed, and I saw the toll the night had taken on my father. He looked older, the trauma of having to seriously hurt someone etched on his face. That evening, our phones buzzed incessantly with texts from relatives asking about the rumors. We both turned our phones off. Later, Detective Lombard called the landline to confirm the restraining order had been served to a heavily medicated Tyson in the hospital, and that his parents were furious. That night, sleep was impossible. At 3 a.m., I sat in the hallway with a baseball bat. Dad found me and simply sat with his back against the opposite wall, staying with me in the dark until my breathing slowed and I felt safe enough to try sleeping again. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a call from Alina. He got straight to the point. Tyson's parents had hired a notorious defense attorney, Cameron Wolfe, who was known for getting burglary charges reduced. She warned he would likely try to frame the break-in as a messy dispute between exes rather than a premeditated crime. I hung up, my stomach twisting at the prospect of a long legal battle. When I turned my phone on fully, it flooded with notifications. 47 missed calls from my sister, Ava. I played her voicemail. She was crying, accusing me of ruining Tyson's life over a stupid ring, saying he made a mistake but didn't deserve what my dad did. Her words felt like a punch to the chest, but they also made everything clear. She had chosen her side. I saved the voicemail as evidence and deleted the rest of her messages. An email from Detective Lombard provided a contact for a victim advocate, Marissa Gutierrez. I saved the information but couldn't bring myself to call yet. The idea of explaining everything to another person was overwhelming. In the kitchen, Dad was making breakfast. We ate in heavy silence for 10 minutes before he put his fork down, his eyes red-rimmed. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice thick with guilt. "I'm sorry for trusting him, for giving him your mom's ring." I told him it wasn't his fault that Tyson had fooled us both, but the weight of his regret was palpable. My phone rang again, an unknown number. It was Bradley Porter, an insurance investigator. He needed to meet about the fake policy Tyson had taken out on the ring. We arranged to meet at a downtown coffee shop that afternoon. Sitting across from Bradley, I watched him spread documents across the table. He showed me the forged policy where Tyson had inflated the ring's value to $85,000 to get a larger payout. The real value was closer to $15,000. Every page was another lie. Bradley suggested I get the ring professionally appraised and documented for the case, as I had no official paperwork for it. He gave me the name of a trusted expert, and I scheduled an appointment from the coffee shop parking lot, asking my dad to come with me. When I returned to Dad's house, I saw Ava's car parked on the street. I stayed in my car, watching through the window as they argued on the porch. Her voice rose, and I heard her say Tyson was just trying to get what was rightfully his. Dad's posture turned to steel. "Leave my property right now," he said, his voice hard and cold in a way I'd never heard before. Ava left in tears. Inside, Dad looked shattered. Said his heart was breaking for both his hurting daughters, but he could not support someone who defended a man who would do what Tyson did. We moved to the couch, and I leaned against his shoulder, both of us understanding our family was forever changed. The next morning, Detective Lombard called with a major update. A warrant for Tyson's bank records revealed he had lost $23,000 gambling in just 4 months, all on Maxed. Credit cards. The timelines matched the threatening texts from the loan shark perfectly. His laptop search history was even more damning. Multiple searches on how to pick a deadbolt, pawn shops that paid cash for jewelry, and the insurance claim process for stolen items, all conducted in the weeks leading up to the break-in. While he was texting me daily, calling me bitter and unfair, he was literally researching how to burglarize my home. The sickness I felt was profound. Later, I checked my email and found a draft victim impact statement from Alina. I stared at the blank document for over an hour, unable to articulate the fear, the violation, and the fracturing of my family. Few hours later, the victim advocate Marissa Gutierrez called. Her voice was gentle but direct. She was a therapist who specialized in helping crime victims, and she offered to come to my dad's house. Something in her tone felt genuinely understanding, so I agreed to meet her the next day. When Marissa arrived, she was younger than I'd expected. She immediately asked about my cat, which put me at ease. For 2 hours, I talked about everything: the relationship, the betrayal, the harassment, the break-in. She listened without judgment, never making me feel dramatic. She explained that my hypervigilance, my sleeplessness, and my constant replaying of events were normal trauma responses. She taught me grounding techniques for when panic surged and gave me homework to start journaling my feelings instead of letting them spin endlessly in my head. A few days later, Dad and I went to the jewelry appraiser. As the expert examined my mother's ring under his magnifying lens, he mentioned something chilling. Someone had called his office last month asking to sell a ring matching this exact description. Dad and I locked eyes across the table, the same horrible realization dawning on us simultaneously. Tyson had been shopping the ring around before the break-in, planning his theft for far longer than we had imagined. Detective Lombard later confirmed this. The pawn shop owner, Eric, remembered Tyson showing him photos of the ring and scheduling an appointment for 2 days after my trip. He had been so sure he would succeed. The evidence was a mountain, and while it strengthened the case, it also made me feel incredibly stupid for not seeing the signs. In my next session with Marissa, I confessed this feeling. She stopped me firmly. "His lying wasn't your failure," she said. She reminded me that con artists are skilled at deception because they practice it constantly, and that even trained professionals get fooled. I needed to stop blaming myself for trusting someone I had loved. 8 days after the break-in, Detective Lombard called with news that sent a chill through me. Tyson had been released from the hospital on $50,000 bail, posted without hesitation by his parents. The anger was immediate and sharp. They were enabling him, treating him as the victim. He was confined to the county and had to check in with the court, but the mere knowledge that he was free and walking around made my hands shake so badly I had to set my coffee cup down. Later, Alina called with an update that made my stomach drop. Tyson's attorney, Cameron Wolfe, had floated a plea deal. In exchange for dropping the assault charges against my dad and a recommendation for probation, Tyson would plead guilty. The audacity took my breath away. Alina's response, however, was immediate and firm. "Absolutely not," she had told him. She assured me our case was solid and they were prepared to go to trial. Hearing her defend my interests so fiercely brought me to the verge of relieved tears. At evening, I finally accepted I could never return to my old apartment. I began scrolling through listings online, daunted by the cost of breaking my lease and moving. Dad sat beside me studying the screen over my shoulder. "Let me help with the deposit," he offered quietly, explaining he had savings for exactly this kind of emergency. I was grateful, but it was bittersweet. My entire life was being uprooted because Tyson couldn't handle his own failures. We spent over an hour analyzing neighborhoods, with Dad applying a military level of scrutiny to lighting, security, and crime stats. His thoroughness was comforting, yet it underscored the real danger I had been in. Next day, I met with Marissa to start my victim impact statement. She pulled up a blank document and asked me to list the concrete ways this crime had affected me. My voice grew steadier as I cataloged the losses: the sense of safety in my own home, the fractured relationship with my sister, the financial costs, the constant underlying fear. Marissa typed everything, organizing my scattered thoughts into clear, powerful statements. She reminded me I didn't need to perform for the court, just tell the truth. After 2 hours, I had 3 pages that laid bare the extensive damage Tyson had caused, far beyond the physical break-in. Weeks later, I returned to my old apartment with Dad and a police escort to pack my life into boxes. Standing in the bedroom doorway, I saw the scratches on my dresser from where Tyson had rifled through my jewelry box. The space felt violated, unsafe, like it belonged to a stranger. We worked mechanically for 6 hours, packing in silence. My cat stayed in her carrier, meowing nervously. When we finished, I left the keys with the building manager, who waived the lease-breaking fees after reading my letter citing the domestic violence clause. That small act of kindness made my eyes burn with unshed tears. I walked out without looking back. I moved into a small one-bedroom apartment in a building with a doorman and security cameras, paying a premium for the peace of mind. Dad spent the entire first day helping me, installing extra locks and a security bar on the door with military precision. He checked every window, tested every lock, and arranged the furniture to eliminate blind spots. By evening, the apartment felt like a fortress, and for the first time in weeks, I could take a full, deep breath, comforted by the fact Tyson had no idea where I was. 3 days later, Detective Lombard emailed to confirm the DA was proceeding with formal charges: first-degree burglary, attempted grand theft, forgery, and insurance fraud. The preliminary hearing was set for 3 weeks away, and I would need to testify. My heart pounded at the thought of facing Tyson. Alina called soon after to walk me through the process, explaining this was just to establish probable cause, not the full trial, and that she would be with me the entire time. A week later, a text came through from an unknown number. It was Ava. "We need to talk," it read. "There are things about Tyson you don't know." I stared at it for a full day, torn between curiosity and exhaustion. Finally, I responded with only my new address, adding that if she was there to defend him, she shouldn't bother. She arrived. She looked terrible, exhausted and thin, with dark circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't hide. She sat on my couch and the words tumbled out. Tyson had been pressuring her for money from our dad, supposedly for legal fees, but she suspected it was for gambling. She had found betting apps on his phone and confronted him. "His voice changed," she said, her own voice trembling. "It became cold and mean." He had grabbed her wrist hard enough to leave bruises when she tried to walk away. He started crying, real tears this time, not the performative ones from before. She admitted she had been stupid to believe his lies and was starting to see how he had manipulated us both. She felt trapped, living with him at his parents' house and watching his anger escalate. I felt a complicated mix of anger toward her and genuine concern for her safety. I told her honestly that I couldn't be her support system, but I gave her Marissa's contact information. She took the number, apologized again, and left quietly. I locked the door behind her, emotionally drained, but relieved she was finally seeing the truth. 3 weeks later, I walked into the courthouse for the preliminary hearing with my dad beside me. The building was all marble and echoing ceilings, the air thick with formality. In the courtroom, Tyson sat at the defense table, pale and leaning on a cane, with Cameron Wolfe beside him looking arrogantly confident. The hearing began with Cameron arguing this was a simple misunderstanding between emotional exes, that my dad had used excessive force, and that the charges were an overreaction. The judge, however, seemed unimpressed, flipping through photos of the lockpick kit and forged documents. Lena then stood and calmly laid out the facts: the months of premeditation, the fraud, the documented harassment. When it was my turn to testify, I swore to tell the truth, my voice surprisingly steady. For 40 minutes, I described the relationship, the betrayal, and the relentless campaign to get the ring back. Cameron tried to interrupt, suggesting I was being vindictive, but Alina objected each time, and the judge sustained her objections. The judge even looked directly at Cameron and stated that the ring legally belonged to me, regardless of any relationship drama. Hearing that felt like a surge of validation. Finally, an authority was confirming I wasn't crazy for refusing to hand over my mother's ring. After my testimony, the judge found probable cause for every charge and scheduled the trial for 2 months out, denying the request to reduce bail. Tyson's parents, sitting in the back, stood up looking furious. We left through a side door with a security escort Alina had arranged. Only when we were safely in the car with the doors locked did I finally let myself breathe normally again. In the weeks that followed, I settled into a new, cautious routine in my apartment. I checked locks twice each night, varied my schedule, and remained hyper-aware of my surroundings. Marissa assured me this vigilance was a normal trauma response that would fade in time, but some nights I still woke up convinced I heard someone at the door. I returned to work on a half-day schedule. My coworkers were supportive without prying, and my boss quietly informed me they had updated the visitor policy. Now, anyone without an employee badge needed prior approval, a small but significant change that made me feel safer. Ava texted occasionally with updates on her therapy. I kept my replies polite but distant, maintaining clear boundaries. Marissa mentioned the possibility of family therapy someday, but I wasn't ready, and she supported that decision completely. Then Alina called with a new development. Cameron Wolfe had presented a more serious plea offer. Tyson would plead guilty to burglary and fraud in exchange for the assault charges against my dad being dropped and a recommendation for probation. She presented the option neutrally, emphasizing the decision was ours, but confirming our case was strong for trial if we preferred to go that route. At night, Dad and I sat at his kitchen table for hours, talking in circles as our coffee went cold. He worried about the emotional toll of a trial, while I felt that probation was an insultingly light consequence for the devastation Tyson had caused. I wanted a jury to hear every detail of his manipulation, but I was also desperate for the nightmare to be over. Dad reminded me that even with probation, a felony record would follow Tyson for life, impacting his future in every way. Still, I was torn. I scheduled an emergency session with Marissa for the next morning. During my emergency session, I vented to Marissa about my conflicting desires, the need for Tyson to face maximum consequences warring with my desperate need for closure. She listened intently and then offered a crucial perspective I had been missing. She explained that accepting a plea deal was not a sign of weakness or letting him off easy. She walked me through the reality of probation, the strict monitoring, the mandatory check-ins, the constant threat of incarceration for any violation. She then said something that struck me deeply. Closure comes from inside, from healing and moving forward, not from watching someone else suffer the exact punishment we think they deserve. I realized I had been clinging to the idea that a harsher sentence would somehow undo the violation I felt, that his suffering would magically restore my sense of safety. Marissa helped me see that my healing was a separate journey from the legal consequences imposed on Tyson. Over the next week, Dad and I continued to discuss it from every angle. When we felt resolved, I called Alina. I told her we would accept the plea, but only under strict, non-negotiable conditions. Tyson had to plead guilty to every charge, complete a gambling addiction program, pay full restitution for my moving and therapy costs, and the restraining order had to be made permanent. Lena took our terms to Cameron. 2 days later, she called back. He had agreed to everything except the exact restitution amount, which a judge would decide based on my documentation. We accepted. The plea hearing was scheduled for the following week, and suddenly I had to prepare myself to face Tyson one final time. Marissa spent our next session coaching me on how to stay grounded. We practiced my victim impact statement until I could read it without my voice shaking. She reminded me that his emotions were not my responsibility. The morning of the hearing, Dad drove us to the courthouse. My hands wouldn't stop trembling. When we entered the courtroom, Tyson stood at the defense table looking diminished. The judge asked him to state his plea. In a quiet, flat voice, he said guilty to each charge. He didn't look at me once. The judge then turned to me. I stood, my papers shaking in my hands, and read my statement. I described the loss of safety, the fractured family, the financial and emotional costs. I emphasized this wasn't a lover's quarrel, but a calculated series of crimes. When I finished, the judge sentenced him. 5 years of probation, 500 hours of community service, mandatory gambling addiction treatment, $8,500 in restitution, and a permanent restraining order for 10 years. As we left the courthouse, I felt a profound internal shift. It wasn't the perfect justice I had once fantasized about, but it was accountability. It was closure. And for the first time, it felt like enough. In the weeks and months that followed, a fragile new normal began to take shape. I watched from a distance as Tyson began checking in with his stern probation officer and attended his court-mandated programs. The first restitution payment arrived, a small but tangible validation that the system had worked. Detective Lombard called to check in, reassuring me that Tyson's probation officer was known for being strict and thorough. Which gave me an added layer of peace. 3 months after the plea hearing, Ava texted asking to meet for coffee. I agreed, choosing a neutral location. When I arrived, she was already there, looking nervous but clear-eyed. She told me she had left Tyson a month prior, finally seeing him for who he was. She was in therapy and working to understand her own choices. I listened, cautiously assessing her sincerity. She said she knew rebuilding trust might take years, or might never happen, but she was committed to being honest about the damage she had caused. We agreed to take things slowly, with clear boundaries, acknowledging that our relationship could perhaps become something new and healthier, even if it would never be what it was. Around the same time, my dad started attending a veterans support group. Gradually, I noticed the change in him. The constant apologies stopped. The tension in his shoulders eased. One evening, over dinner at my apartment, he told me quietly that he had no regrets about protecting me that night, but he was grateful to have found a space to process the complicated feelings that came with using force, even justified force. Now, 6 months after the break-in, I am genuinely settled in my new apartment. My orange cat sleeps contentedly on the couch beside me. My weekly sessions with Marissa are something I look forward to. My mother's ring rests securely in a safety deposit box. I don't wear it yet, but knowing it is safe and waiting for me feels right. I've learned that healing isn't linear and that justice doesn't always feel as satisfying as you imagine. But choosing my safety over everyone else's comfort was the right choice. I am proud of how I navigated one of the worst experiences of my life. That pride feels solid and real, a foundation to build upon from here.